here, and you all have been very patient. So thank you for coming. I'm Dana Gold. I'm an attorney and the Director of Education with the Government Accountability Project. And with me, the video thing is in the way, is Rick Bloom with the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, Jesse Franzlau, policy analyst with Open Government, who is our co-organizer of this event. Thank you, Jesse, for this. And James Risen, Director of the Press Freedom Defense Fund, and we know him as the president journalist on national security issues. Now he's with The Intercept. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for being here. So we are here, transparency tools for public interest activists working with whistleblowers and using FOIA. So we're here to talk about this combination of how the power of information can promote accountability, oversight, and justice, essentially. So we're talking about the dovetailing of those two issues. And we're going to try, even though we're running behind, obviously, but we really want to make this somewhat interactive, but definitely at the end an opportunity for breakout sessions for folks to do a deeper dive on the issues of whistleblowing and FOIA. So we'll try to set that up, but we're going to kind of download a bunch of information for you, give you an opportunity to ask questions midway through. Jim and I are going to kind of handle the whistleblowing source issues, and then we'll move into FOIA a little bit more after that. So that's kind of the structure, but I want to know who's here. So if we could go around the room, actually, and tell me, if you're willing, your name, what organization you're with, and whether or not you have ever worked with employee sources in the context of your work, or if you have ever used FOIA, so you're familiar with using FOIA. Okay? So Christy, do you want to start? She's our host at Open Gov Hub. Thank you, Open Gov Hub, also for being our host and the best place ever to have an event, except for the obvious thing.
Yes. No, we have it here.
Yeah. So.
Yes, my name is Christy Arbogast, and I do all the operations communications here at Open Gov Hub. And I have never worked with.
Great. Can we go back to you?
I'm Nadia.
Okay. Have you worked with employee sources or?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm Laura Cruz. I'm a staff. I work for FOIA.
Great.
Greetings, everybody. Al Sharif, House, the law student activist. I haven't worked with FOIA. I haven't filed a FOIA. I worked with folks who tried to get FOIA bill through the post-government parliament and tried to get and unfortunately spiraled down.
Great, thank you.
Mostly files for it.
I'm Michael Croft. I think our FOIA.
Great.
Currently, I work here.
Hi, I'm Gil. I'm
And Michael. I work. Yeah. Where's
My name is
Great.
I'm Richard. Yeah.
Our organization doesn't do much.
Probably. All right. Thank you. That is super useful. So there's a that's not surprising. So I think that makes me feel better about what we sort of have in terms of some of you get more about FOIA, but less about employees. So hopefully you'll come away with some tools and we'll have some opportunity to answer questions and get into some of the weeds and strategies and have some fun. Okay, so we're gonna let's start. Okay.
technology.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I mean, everybody can talk about their organization. Benefit of choosing to do it. So we are GAP, Government Accountability Project, is a whistleblower advocacy organization. We promote government and corporate accountability. We do that by working with whistleblowers, both defending them with their rights to speak out about wrongdoing, but also making sure that their information makes sense. So we use a bunch of different strategies to do that, from litigation under the underlying disclosures to media outreach to congressional matchmaking and bill work to investigative work, FOIA, et cetera. So we do, and certainly I'm working with investigative. So that's kind of how we do it. So it's a multi-pronged guerrilla strategy, but using the power of information provided by insiders, so whistleblowers. Let's talk a little about what I mean. So I think a common cultural definition of what a whistleblower is someone who exercises free speech rights to expose or challenge abuses of power that betray the public trust. I think that's basically a decent definition. As a lawyer, I tend to operate more in this world, which I think is important, not because lawyers matter, but because it matters for whistleblowing in terms of their rights and protections. So this is like an amalgam legal definition, which I note because later I'll talk briefly about the challenge of whistleblower protection laws and how that makes employee sources both actually incredibly vulnerable because of the patchwork protection. So I'll talk about that. But I would say this is a typical legal definition rooted in the Whistleblower Protection Act, which is the big law that protects non-national security, non-intelligence federal employees. So this is what covers federal employees and gives them the right to report So they can disclose either internally to managers, hotlines, ethics officers, et cetera, or externally to agencies, Congress, investigative bodies, the press, et cetera, information that they reasonably believe, so they don't have to prove it, but they have to have a reasonable belief that there's a problem, information that evidences a violation of law, rule, or regulation, gross mismanagement, a gross waste of funds, an abuse of authority, or a substantial and specific danger to public health or safety. So those are important because it's we're not talking about someone who has a policy difference unless the policy difference is going to result in one of these consequences. It's about the threshold that has to rise pretty high. We're not talking about someone, is stealing extra Post-it notes from the supply cabinet. I mean, that's a problem, but it's really not rising to this level of concern. The reason whistleblowers are protected, employees who are the best, they have the best, seat, the best view in the theater, right? They are the ones who are on the ground to see problems that affect the public interest. And so we want to protect their rights to disclose issues that rise to the public interest. And these are just kind of a way of defining what the public interest is by meeting this standard. So that's the first threshold that I think is important to understand about what a whistleblower is. And again, typically, this is the amalgam legal definition, it's typically the whistleblower protection laws in this country are largely rooted around their employment laws. They're rooted around an employee because it's an employee who is in the situation to see wrongdoing, which is a little bit different than a victim of wrongdoing, which is, it could be similar, but it's different. It's someone who basically can witness the wrongdoing in their workplace. Not all the laws mandate that the disclosure has to be an employee, but I would say 95% of our employment, they protect the rights of employees to speak out free from reprisal. And so whistleblowers, I'll talk about misperceptions in a second, but whistleblowers, it's so funny. Like, I always feel like this is like the secret sauce of power for public interest organizations, because employees can report problems across a huge range of issues, right? So it's like this tool like FOIA, right, that you can get access to information that exposes injustices or violations of public trust that are enormous. Like, pick your issue. If you have a whistleblower, you can move a lot further down the field if you have their information. So food safety is one. We have a long presence in working with whistleblowers in the food industry. Ken Kendrick is someone who reported the gross contamination problems at Peanut Corporation of America that were resulting in people dying and hundreds being sick, and it was the largest food recall in history. Ken was, and actually his disclosures resulted in a passage of the whistleblower provisions of the Food Safety Modernization Act and the criminal prosecution of the top 3 executives at PCA, which is like unheard of, like for people to actually get prison sentences. And so, because of the patchwork of laws, Ken blew the whistle after he had actually left the employment of PCA, so he didn't have an employment action because his whistleblowing came after he had left employment. There weren't protections for his specific issue. He had he has a hard time in Texas, moving out of small town Texas, where the company went bankrupt, people lost their jobs, and he was essentially vilified by the town, for shutting down work, right, for all these people who worked at PCA, even though he basically saved lives. So his story is pretty hard, and he's had a hard time kind of climbing out of it, even though, but for his disclosures, he's like literally saved lives and put people in jail who should be in jail. So, but hugely transformative disclosure. Immigration abuses. This is an older example. We are working with several immigration-related whistleblowers right now, and we'll talk more about those on our Friday event. Can't talk about some of those yet. But Kathy Harris is a great example. She blew the whistle with the Customs Service on detention, and they were targeting African American women and Hispanic women for strip searches, and they would sometimes detain them for up to 3 days. It was unbelievable, and they were like the least likely population to be bringing drugs across. So she blew the whistle on this. That totally resulted in complete transformation of the regulations around detention with searches internationally. So that's Kathy Harris. Another, and I think a great example for right now, as we all know, I mean, what has changed the dime on the immigration nightmare that we are facing in this country right now are these, like, for instance, the audio tapes were released by an insider to Jennifer Harbury, an attorney working at the border, who released the audio tapes of the kids to ProPublica, and that really catalyzed the public resistance to the separation policy. I mean, and that made the wheels of democracy kind of work, right? I mean, you know, they're rusty and broken, but that's like the power of information to really, in partnership with the press, right? The power of an insider to get it to the press, to catalyze public outrage, to get Congress to act, to eventually pressure the executive branch. I mean, I just can't underestimate the power of information. You all know this. Climate change has been a big issue with whistleblowers reporting censorship. That's actually something that I didn't include, but that is a new provision of the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, that federal employees are protected if they disclose scientific censorship. This is an NRC whistleblower. He actually blew the whistle on weaknesses at nuclear plants subject to dam flooding. And he has been not disclosing national security issues, not an intelligence whistleblower, but was threatened with criminal investigation and prosecution for releasing official use only documents. You know, terrible harassment, incredibly chilling. This is Joel Clement, who you might know, who was Department of Interior whistleblower, who blew the whistle after he was, a bunch of senior executive service people were moved after he was a very vocal, as part of his job, proponent of advocating about the adverse effects of climate change on Alaska Native population. So that's kind of a disadministration story. So most employees stay silent, and they do that. I'm not going to make you guess why, no, but there are two reasons. One is fear of reprisal, and that's a big one, and it's a legitimate. And I, gave you some examples. They can range from, being fired to being harassed to being physically threatened to getting, poor performance appraisals to not, to being isolated and removed from the information and, being job transferred. I mean, it's basically the limits of your imagination or the limits of creative forms of reprisal. But the other one is fear of futility, like cynicism, that speaking out isn't going to make it different. But we can see repeatedly that well-protected whistleblowers, when their information is leveraged effectively, make a profound, even now when we're feeling pretty sad about the state of the world. So I think some of those chilling effects of the fear of reprisal and the fear of futility are fueled by some misperceptions of whistleblowers. I mean, this is kind of my theory, but these are synonyms of the word whistleblower in Merriam-Webster. Notifier is neutral, informant maybe, but they're all pretty negative, right? So that's so there's a lot of baggage that just comes with the word anyway. People are nervous about that word. They don't like being tethered with that word. Often they're, and I'll talk a little bit more. So between those misperceptions, there are other misperceptions that we all hold, even though we all could be in the situation of seeing wrongdoing in the workplace, right? That they're all like us potentially. Some of the misperceptions, right, are that whistleblowers report externally. They only report externally. But 97% of employees actually report internally first. This is an incredibly, I find this is the most important thing that I want you to take away from this. Because once you know this, it changes how you have to deal with that source and the information they're disclosing, because the information is tied to them. If they have said something to a coworker, or if their information is related to their expertise or the information that they would have access to. So the idea of being able to kind of keep your source anonymous is a hard thing to promise, let's put it that way. So knowing this is a really important factor for you for, kind of as we think about FOIA requests around whistleblowers' disclosures or thinking about protecting those employee sources. Again, most report internally first. I think another misperception is that whistleblowers are self-interested. They're motivated by self-enrichment or to protect themselves if they're going to face, they're worried about their job and they blow the whistle. I mean, I think that there are stories like that. There are a few, but the large majority are people, I always say that they miss the memo. Like they don't realize that speaking up is, might put a target on their back. They actually believe they're the most loyal in the organization. They have a great amount of expertise. They have a great deal of a sense of agency of their ability to affect change. They're doing out of a sense of professional, ethical, or legal duty. It's like their job, and so they're speaking out. So I think it's another important point to understand kind of the population of an employee. They're not there to be activists or take on demand. They're kind of part of the institution that they want to work, and they think it will if they say something. So I think the other piece, this is like will be interesting transitioning to Jim, is that I think because Edward Snowden and Reality Winner and the national security whistleblowers, they consume so much of the public narrative around whistleblowing, like that's who people think about. It makes people think that whistleblowing is a crime, and it's not. It's a protected right. National security whistleblowers, you do not have a right to disclose intelligence and classified information publicly. That is a big problem. And that is true. It is a crime. But most whistleblowers are not. All the people I showed you before, they're not dealing with intelligence. They're not national security whistleblowers. They have codified protected rights. So, but you can imagine all these different misperceptions weighing on the employee, chilling on top of the fear of reprisal and the fear of futility, creating that chilling effect. And then on top of that, these are like examples. These are like the alt, government groups that, alt EPA and alt NASA, rogue NASA that came out after the first gag orders started, after the Trump administration came down. The word ban, you may remember from CDC, ordering all employees to attend anti-leaking classes. There's a message being given. These are all illegal. Like they cannot gag employee rights to speech. You cannot, and non-disclosure agreements are not legal. Gag orders are not legal. If you cannot, they do not supersede whistleblower rights. But boy, if this message is handed to you, that's going to send a message to you as an employee about that you might get in trouble for speaking out, right? So for you to go out and overcome those misperceptions, figure out the landscape, and deal with this chilling effect, it's going to be pretty hard, right? So there's a lot of resistance as an employee to speaking out. So I just mentioned there's a patchwork of protections in whistleblower law. So there is not one law that protects all whistleblowers, and this is a huge problem. The Whistleblower Protection Act protects federal employees, but not intelligence employees. There are several laws that kind of give rights to intelligence employees to report information internally, of course, to agencies that are usually responsible for the wrongdoing. So that's, of course, a problem. There are other laws embodied in the different federal statutes. There are employee protection provisions in a bunch of different federal statutes. So under the environmental laws, consumer laws, safety laws, they have employee protection provisions or whistleblower laws embedded into them that encourage employees to basically report issues that would kind of undermine compliance with those laws. The National Defense Authorization Act actually is not about defense authorization, it's just embedded in there, but that now protects federal contractors and gives them the same rights, actually better rights than federal employees because they can get to a jury trial. So this actually now protects federal contractor employees, not intelligence, but that's a really important expansion of whistleblower rights. So if you have federal contractors who are working in a bunch of different agencies, they have rights to speak out. The False Claims Act and several other laws give a bounty provision for disclosing fraud if you prevail. So these are the ones that you sometimes hear about where you can, earn some cash if you blow the whistle. But again, it's like you might as well buy a lottery ticket for the number of people that are becoming rich that way. And then there are a bunch of state laws and even local laws that protect whistleblowers. So it's a patchwork where it's like, yay, there's a lot of laws out there, but there could be a lot of holes you could fall through. So this is where I say that, and so these are the kinds of things you have to look at. You look at the kind of wrongdoing that was disclosed if you're going to think about the law. Is it a federal employee? Is it a state employee? Is it a contractor employee? Who is it disclosed to and how? What kind of retaliation did they experience? When did the employee, because they all have different statute limitations, when did the employee become aware of the reprisal? Where was the disclosure made? Because that can depend on your state remedies or your local remedies. And again, is classified or other protected information involved because that can be disclosed. So it's like, I don't know, for those of you who went to law school, I always say it's like the game section. It's like, John, Harry, Bob, Lucy, and Angela are sitting at a table and eating fish and touring chicken. Red. And it's kind of like, that's what whistleblower law is like. It's like, how do you figure out what protections available? So protection is paramount for all of these reasons I've talked about. And not to be a poster advertisement for lawyers, but lawyers in this case are essential. They're super important for helping you navigate and make sure you don't, if you have an employee source, that they are not made vulnerable. They have attorney-client privilege, that they can offer the strongest protection possible. Public interest organizations do not have that level of protection. They are not giving legal advice to a whistleblower. A journalist has problematic protections, and they have limited, it's more of a norm than the law, and Rick and Jim, you can talk about that. I mean, many are willing to go to jail to protect their sources, but that's kind of what they have to do. Whereas me as an attorney, I don't have to do that. I just say I have privilege. So it's good, and often a lawyer can be a broker to a journalist or a broker to Congress, or so they are your friends, and they help provide that backstop of safety, especially if it's a lawyer who understands that the motivation of the whistleblower, it's not just about their employment claim, it's about them they want to fix a problem that they've seen. So I would just note that issue of anonymity. Sometimes there's a sense that, tell us your information and we'll protect your anonymity. It is very hard to do, and it is not always the smartest thing to do. Sometimes the safest position for a whistleblower is to be very public. From a legal perspective, you'll have to prove that the employer knew that you were making a disclosure to have a good claim. So let's say if you're an employee who reported something internally, and then you go outside and the information gets out, even if you don't, the employer could kind of figure out who that employee was, but can make a more credible claim that they didn't actually know that the employee was the one who made the disclosure, even though so it's a much harder legal case to prove factually. So also you can shepherd a lot of public support from stakeholders, Congress, et cetera, to make it about the information and not about the messenger, which of course is the move that the employer makes, is to make it about the messenger and not the message. So anonymity is not always the best or safest route, nor is it something that can be guaranteed. So we'll talk maybe. And then benefits and risks of working with journalists, and Jim will cover that as well. And there are alternatives to accessing the information or supplementing information. So if an employee can give you information about wrongdoing, they can kind of help you craft a targeted FOIA request. Jesse's going to have a case study kind of about, I think one of the case studies, at least in the FOIA guide, is about kind of how a tip led to being able to ask for certain documents. But again, being careful about how you craft those requests, so it's not just find this one document that only this one employee would know about. So figuring out how to craft a safe FOIA request to expand on a disclosure is important. And again, matchmaking with Congress or agencies who can then request information by not making it about the source, but they can be the ones to tip off to demand documents disclosed by an agency. So trust is super important, partnership is important, and information is powerful. We have little guides that I'll hand out that has a lot of these tips for advice for whistleblowers in them. So we have these orange guides that I think are on your chair. We also have a guide for journalists and a guide for federal employees in the science agencies, but it really applies to all federal employees except for the intelligence community. So if you want those, you can get one. But talk to a lawyer, create a paper trail or a diary. Those are really, take notes. That is super important. Keep your evidence in a safe place. Organize support among coworkers if possible. Secure and protect evidence without removing it. Communicate using secure means. Don't talk to stakeholders during work hours. Not smart. And turn off location tracking in your phone. And make sure a large number of people possess documents. That's another way to kind of bury the trail and to not make it have to come back to you. So those are some key things. And I'm going to hand it over to Jim now to talk kind of about his commentary on whistleblowers and FOIA and some general topics. So, and then after you talk, you can ask, and then we'll.
Thanks for having me. I'm Jim Risen, and Dana said I'm the director of the First Look Press Freedom Defense Fund, which is a fund that's been given endowment by Sarah Midyar, so started the Intercept. And our goal is to legal assistance to both workers and sources who can. And I also write is mostly frustration. So I can talk about all these issues from a reporter, a journalist standpoint. And you're right that it's best, first thing these people should do is get a lawyer. That's one of the mistakes a lot of them don't. But from a journalist standpoint, I can tell you kind of what happens generally. Most of the people I've dealt with for security, which, as you said, there's almost no protection. Some limited protections. Those are really a joke. And the problem for intelligence whistleblowers is that usually the thing that outrages them, the thing that is newsworthy, thing that they know, is about a secret policy issue. Has been approved at the highest levels of the government, but which is being kept secret from the public. That's outrageous. And but it's a policy issue. So what the problem for whistleblowers or sources is that they want to talk about something that everybody in their organization knows about. It's not something that is not approved, not waste, fraud, and abuse. It's something that is part of their job. And so when they come to a reporter with something like that, they have virtually no system. But a lot of these people first have tried to go in the talk to people about these issues. And what happens is, somebody, their boss or somebody else is still, shut up. Your job to decide we should be doing this. And so that's one of the basic problems in the intelligence. I covered the CIA. That was a constant problem for these people, is to see something that they knew in public. Really a huge story. They're damaging to the government, outrageous, potentially illegal. Their bosses. And so all of these protections, these legal protections, matter for the great majority of whistleblowers who come. Most of them, for a lot of the press in Washington, are trying to get sorts of world or in law. So if you take away the FBI, the CIA, the Pentagon, the NSA, that's the world. So that's a real problem. One of the, there are whistleblowers in that world who do know something about this fraud. And even in that regard, a lot of it's classified, and they get vilified for. I've written about one case like that I think is pretty illustrative of the problems. I wrote about 10 years ago. I wrote a story about and there was a leak investigation, and I didn't realize this at the time, but the FBI raided houses by people from the NSA who they thought were sources. But the reason they thought they were my sources is because they had filed a complaint, Inspector General, about fraud and abuse, and then that's a contract. And because they had filed a complaint with the Inspector General, they became suspect for criminal security. NSA and Senate. And that's one of the issues, is that the internal system for reporting claims is turned against me. And it becomes, I think that's true throughout the government. One of the main reason sources come to the press is because nobody listens to them inside. And a lot of people, civilian side, intelligence, people have generally already exhausted processes by the time. When you hear over and over say, I went to IG or boss, G, information, etc. Never heard back from them. I wrote a memo, circulated it, and nothing happened. Or I wanted to go to Congress and my boss transferred me to another job because I was trying to go around the system. Actually, so all those things here version from people who ended ultimately. So that's one of the big misconceptions. Said people already lost, and it's you meet these people. They're actually, as you said, they're mostly normal people, but they are different from the rest of their employees. It's hard to like stereotype them or classify them. They don't like shit. That is probably the one common. They're tired of it. Sometimes you get people like that who really somebody who sees something that really shouldn't be happening and the policy is doing something about it. That's rare too. I've had those, and I've had every kind of. I mean, it's a mix, the personality. There's, for the most part, they have a whole series of conflicts. They're not saints, all martyrs. But from the press standpoint, we tend to believe generally that it doesn't matter what their motivation is. Elsewhere. So I always tell reporters, if somebody comes to you with a story, you can't just go with it. So you need to listen to a whistleblower, make sure everything you can out of it, they have then confirm everything with other sources before you write anything. So we don't take word of it. They are a source. Everything you have to. That's why ultimately when there's a big story and you see who the press has been talking, some of them will look messy. It's usually because that person gave you a tip. He or she has a lot of weird things going on in their lives, but that wasn't the only person. Even screwed up people. So, that's kind of the press approach to this. And one of the things we try to do is if a person is in real danger, like try to protect them on an ad hoc basis, we work out what your relationship with the source is on an individual case by case basis. You promise that you will protect them. But there's different gradations. So the explicit source. What? And as you said, there's no legal protection for a lot of whistleblowers. So it's up to the reporter to try to find protection.
Can I see, are there any little source protection tips you could offer, even if it's
yeah, sure. One of the things that's become a real problem today is that everybody leaves it. And so what I try to do is and walk substance person so that the only thing online is like so there will always be some digital connection. That's the most important thing to remember. The federal government has awesome services. And so it's very difficult to order the government when they really want to. But the best thing to do is to try to only talk person. Osama bin Laden survived 10 years off the grid. Same for reporters. They can prove a relationship with someone which will be but if they can't prove talked about, then they will have to make a choice. Seek an indictment, circumstantial evidence, force other people to talk. So, job of the reporter today is tough. Knowing all along the government's incredible.
I want to pause and make sure if anyone has any questions, kind of on the whistleblower piece, ask them. Anything burning? Okay.
In terms of like the extra policy effort, offer alternative.
Yeah, I mean that is an ongoing battle. It's a hard one. Something that we're working on. Everything from a public interest defense for national security whistleblowers if they're charged under the Espionage Act. That's something that we're always trying for. The other, in terms of the patchwork in the non-national security realm, which maybe applies to most of you in this audience actually, is that we are working on a consolidation act. I've had Kate this year working on what we call the monster, which is like a giant Excel sheet of like 100 maybe plus whistleblower laws at the federal level alone, which will make a great case in part about why consolidating a lot of the federal laws so they all have the same like best in class standards, that they all get jury trials, they all have the same statute limitations, they all have the same standards. They all aren't kicked out by arbitration, so kind of all you would want in terms of the best class legislation. I mean, I think that this patchwork, we have some hope that might happen. I think there's also, I meant to ask you this. There's a coalition we have called the Make It Safe Coalition that we really try to expand a whole range of public interest organizations. So no matter what you work on, who get how important it is to protect whistleblowers because their information is important to the public interest. So we currently actually have a sign-on letter going to expand the whistleblower protections, I think at the federal level, to revise, I think to offer jury trials for federal whistleblowers and other changes. So if you'd like to get involved with that, that is, we'd love to have you as a sign-on for those legislative efforts that we really lead the charge on. Really. Yes.
You see any appetite, legislative sense for rolling back of this classified labeling, which is often a way of saying, I don't want you to know something that's unwise.
Yeah, not
and
in this
in particular,
administration.
the one area where I wonder more and more whether there's really any good justification for allowing the State Department to have any. Now, I understand having a little kind of bureau if you have to have some, I follow somebody wants to respect or whatever, but and I'm thinking almost all the stuff that I be going to in this country sometimes is a lot more important. All the excuses used.
Yeah, I bet both of you have some thoughts on this, but abuse and overuse of classification is historically a huge problem. As a matter of fact, in the Tom Drake case, which you implicitly referenced, one of the whistleblowers who was raided by the FBI, kind of the pre-snow folks, they actually did use retroactive classification to pin him. No, I don't think there's any movement to in this administration.
Occasionally, Charles wants to do some whistleblowers, but it's usually when there's some surge. Some passenger safety, and they quickly lose interest in passing legislation that might help us.
So, okay, we're going to move on. Talk about FOIA.
I also, so my name is Rick Bloom. Let me introduce where I'm from first, and then I wanted to follow up a little bit on what Tim said before we talk a little bit about FOIA. So I am the policy director of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. We've been around for almost 5 decades. We'll celebrate our 50th anniversary in years. And we started as a couple reporters getting together facing subpoenas saying, look, reporters need to know what their legal rights are. And so we need to provide a legal service to help them. And that's grown, engage in direct litigation, learning about court briefs, and work with folks like Tim Rising, lawyers. And I think I need to disclose, don't we receive a little funding? So we receive a little funding, and we do have really good attorneys on staff. In a past life, I worked at Open the Government, and one of the things that we worked on, or talked about, is the rights of whistleblowers and helping whistleblowers together. But we also watched a reporter really go to the mat, and that's the person who's you just heard, and he's being very modest about the risks that he faced and the principles that he stood up for to protect sources. It's important to note that journalists, believe in it, but this is the guy who really stood up and basically losing everything. And so that's how important it is. But you need to know that journalists, which if you have some information and you try to work with journalists, they have certain rights. We helped quash a subpoena against a reporter in Chicago who had obtained a video from a source who wanted to bring me on a police-involved shooting of Juan McDonald. And the video shows that what the police said happened did not really happen. And so the police were very, very interested in who journalist sources were. And so we and others came to his defense and worked out. The judge saw the public interest in allowing Danny to do the recording and the public to see that the person had been shot 16 times and the police didn't really recognize that. So that's a case where it worked out. But there are other cases where the government can just go get the record and get a subpoena. EAP had their information taken in 2013 as a result of that. Justice Department rewrote their guidelines. We were working with them to work appropriate. But that's not an assurance that the press organization will be able to warrant that the records are taken. So journalists have limits. So if you are considering going to a source, talk with them up front about your level of comfort going on the record, or wanting to be completely anonymous, or you need to work that out with the journal. That's not the freedom of information. So some of you have used it, some of you have not. 50 states have 50 different public records statutes. They generally are structured in similar ways to the federal government. I'll be talking mostly about federal FOIA, but different states have different standards. So I just thought of this as different pieces of advice that I would throw out. And the first one that I always tell people is don't use FOIA. If you don't have to, don't do it. Find a source, find somebody who can just give you the data set. Make a phone call. They will probably just give it. Or they may not. Do your research. The second piece of advice is don't try to avoid going for fishing expeditions. Try to know what you're looking for. Try to know where it is. You all may have specific data sets you're interested or groups of information. It's a lot easier and faster to get it if you know exactly where it is or who has it or where it might be. So try to plan ahead. Think specifically, focus on which office if you can figure it out or who might have it. But be ready to catch fish. There was a reporter who had been doing a lot of data-heavy research and investigation on Harrier jet crashes. This is the airplane that could go straight up vertically, but they had problems because they weren't working as well as the manufacturer promised. So he made a FOIA request for the crash investigation. And what he discovered was that one of the family members of the pilot, the parents of one of the pilots involved in the crashes, the pilot had been killed, had been videotaping the pilot. And so he contacted the family, and they were not thrilled, but they were eager to tell the story, and they shared the video. And so he took this very data-heavy story, and he was able to put a face on the problem. And that, it just multiplied the impact of that story. So when you're making FOIA requests, think about whether there's some surprises that you might find in there and be ready for them. The next thing to note is when you make the FOIA request or public records request, the person who's seeing that request and is going to work at that through the system, they're not necessarily your adversary. They can be your best friend. They are just trying to do their job, trying to get the information. So it's good to have a phone call with them. And they might say, what are you really looking for? You have to gauge whether you have a friendly request or an adversarial request to really divulge, here's what I'm really looking for. but they might be able to say, oh, okay, you wrote this way, that's going to make me go to 6 offices. But if you really are looking for this, I can just go to 2, and I can get that for you a lot faster. So that, be willing to have that phone call, and think carefully about whether that person when you say, here's what I'm really looking for, or here's what I'm really looking for without divulging confidential information yourself. So the FOIA officer is often your friend. You, however, may be the friend or you may be the foe of the agency. So think about whether you're making the adversarial request or making a friendly request. And you may want to, if you think it's going to be an adversarial request, you may want to put in a lot of synonyms to memos when you're trying to get memos. Memos, letters, email communications. Remember, a lot of times it's in digital format, and you have a right to get it in that same format that it's stored under the federal FOIA. So make sure you note that. And be ready or appear to be ready to sue. See someone with an Esquire after their name. Maybe it's your spouse. Or find an organization and pitch the idea. I think many of you are organizations that file FOIA requests routinely, so you're probably dealing with people who come to you. Oftentimes your willingness to file those requests, your willingness to sue or find other organizations that are willing to sue, really makes a difference. Agencies say, oh, okay, it's public citizen. They might sue us. We better make sure that we take this seriously and make better decisions. Be ready to appeal. They say no, and if they redact information, they're supposed to say why. It may not be clear why. Just appeal. There's an office within the National Archives called the Office of Government Information Service. The title means nothing. It doesn't tell you what they really do. That was purposeful, but the purpose is they are the FOIA ombudsman for the federal government. And if you have a problem, you can go to them, and they can at least clear up the communication challenges. You can say, you'd like to resolve this dispute. We hope they get stronger and actually put out advisory opinions. They've been able to do that for more than a decade and haven't done it yet, but we hope that changes soon. We want them to be more of a force. And then there are lots of resources that you can use. I'm going to tick off a couple of them to file requests easily. They are preset forms. You just, FOIA is something that we run out of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. There's Muckrock. We create an account, file a request. The government's getting into this business with FOIA Online, run by EPA and a couple other agencies. You can file a request and track it. We are trying to make the systems work better by advocating for the government to invest in that. And then there's FOIA.gov, which has some ability to file requests with agencies and to tell you how long you should be willing to wait from agencies, how long they process requests. We think it could be a lot better, and we're trying to advocate for them to make it a lot better. I can talk about the process. I can talk about each exemption. Does anybody want to hear very quickly the 9 exemptions to FOIA? There are 9 of them. There is a lot of them. I'm happy to answer questions and we can talk about it, but why don't I let Jesse talk a little bit about basic, and then
if you wanted to name off the worst exceptions, but we can get into those. The ones that come up most.
I can tell you, last week I got a. This gives you an idea of how long it takes. Last week I got a response to a FOIA from 2014.
Not bad. Which goes back to Rick's point of if you can avoid filing a FOIA, get the information another way, right? Yeah. But you do get attorney's fees, right? There is some incentive to sue, appeal, be willing to do that. There is some incentive on that.
I think I'm going to use the stand here. All right, thanks, Rick. I'm going to get into a few kind of best case scenarios for using FOIA. Go ahead. Getting feedback. So again, I'm Jesse Francois with Open the Government. And lucky to have the executive director of Open the Government, Lisa Rosenberg, here, and former executive director of Open the Government, Rick Bloom, here. Bless a good presence. And so recently, Open the Government, so first the coalition, Open the Government is a coalition of now more than 100 public interest organizations. It's an inclusive, nonpartisan coalition working to strengthen our democracy and empower the public by advancing policies that create a more open, accountable, responsive government. So we're kind of the glue that holds together a lot of organizations with a lot of interest, but at the center is access to information, transparency, and government accountability. So in the spring, in March, during Sunshine Week, we released a report looking at some of the best practices, the FOIA collaboration, so how FOIA works best in a lot of instances in collaboration. So just I would kind of amend Rick's comment on don't use FOIA. I would say use FOIA with a team or with a partner. So use FOIA with someone who's able to get information from someone on the inside, which is key, which is timely. FOIA takes an exorbitant amount of time. I think the National Security Archive gave a birthday of around 17 years for the longest processed FOIA, and so it can be quite extreme, the way that they hold on to information. And as we talked about earlier, agencies like the State Department will withhold information, and you can see what they're withholding when leaks come out, like WikiLeaks, big disclosures, and then comparing documents is always kind of fun, and looking at the exemptions that they use and overuse and abuse. It's a pretty fun game. So we released a report looking at different ways to collaborate with journalists, collaborate with lawyers, investigators, and how some of these success stories play out to actually get information. And we published the report. We have some copies here. We'll put out. It's on our website. We also put it on the Reporters Committee for Freedom of Press has a wiki site. We put it on there so people can add to it, make comments on it, and add their own stories, which we're encouraging. One of the first ones we highlight, which is a pretty fun story, is Freedom of the Press Foundation got a tip from someone inside an agency in 2015 around that the Obama administration at that time was lobbying pretty hard against the passage of a FOIA reform bill that had this bipartisan, kind of odd bipartisan support of John Cornyn in the Senate, Leahy in the Senate, of Representative Chaffetz in the House, and Representative Cummings in the House. A very odd right-left kind of alliance that you don't see a lot, but on FOIA they wanted to push forward a reform. But it was the Justice Department, the Obama administration, that was actually lobbying against pushing this reform, which would actually, some of the biggest pieces were just codifying the policies that the Obama administration had put into place. So Freedom of the Press Foundation went to work, filed a FOIA request, teamed up with Jason Leopold, who was already doing FOIA work to try to get information about who was lobbying against this FOIA bill. As Rick can attest, it was a pretty messy process, just even trying to figure out who had holds on the FOIA bill, who was lobbying against it. And so they found out, they found out that it was an office in the Justice Department that was lobbying against, and they released those documents, made a pretty big splash, kind of neutralized their effort to continue to lobby so hard against it, and help path the way for that bill to be passed and reform passed in summer 2016. Still enormous problems with FOIA, still a huge need to continue to reform the law, but that was a pretty big one. Electronic Frontier Foundation and Muckrock, they're both organizations in the Open the Government Coalition. And as Rick and others mentioned, Muckrock has some pretty great platforms that they develop so people can go and file their own requests. And what's really great about these is that they provide model requests, examples to get online. They have a lot of really great technology that they use so you can file your request, get information what's happening in your own community. So what kind of surveillance technologies, for example, are local security forces using in your community? You can file a request with the local police forces to try to get information about how this technology is being used. And they've set up platforms to do that, which are pretty great. And they've had a lot of success. And so they've gotten a lot of information really systematically from different places across the country that can help paint a pattern also on how information and how, for example, equipment from the military is being funneled into security forces across the country, which was something that we didn't know much about until 2014, and there was a lot more awareness as we were seeing protesters being confronted by armament and military-grade equipment. So Muckrock teamed up with others and filed requests across the country about this program and found out more about this Defense Department program that essentially gives access military equipment to security forces across the country. Got more information, and then really empowered communities to be able to advocate, to limit this program and to actually implement some accountability measures for this program. Still a big fight, but having more information about that has been important. Going to the state access laws, as Rick mentioned, every state has different law. A lot of them model federal FOIA. A lot of them, some of them are stronger than federal FOIA. So finding out what kind of state laws you might be able to use. One of the cases that Rick mentioned is actually a really interesting one on the Laquan McDonald video, the shooting of the 17-year-old kid in Chicago who was shot 16 times. As Jamie Calvin was getting that video, there was also a journalist filing a FOIA request for that, and it ended up coming out through FOIA. So that was kind of a parallel track of getting information from the inside, from whistleblowers, and also filing the information request and eventually getting that video out. So state openness laws are a pretty important avenue to use to get information that you need. Some of the FOIA tips now. So doing the background research is pretty important, and this kind of gets into this aspect of how to be careful not to expose whistleblowers who are giving you information when you're crafting a FOIA request, to not tip off agencies. So if you're getting information, especially in the national security context, about a document that only a few people know about because it's so sensitive, and then you're filing a request specifically for this document, it could raise some red flags. So doing the background research about what this document entails, about who might know more about this document, where it might be referenced in a footnote, in a report somewhere else, and asking for more generalized records. Then obviously you're going to run into more processing time. It's going to be more of a challenge. So the more specific that you can be, the better. So the other option that you can do, if you're able to find this document sourced in other places, provide a footnote in the FOIA request that points to this document, in order to kind of cover up this trail of where you're getting the information from, and look to various agencies also. So agencies communicate with each other all the time, and so if you're looking for information that someone from a certain agency in the intelligence community perhaps gave you a tip about, there are, I think, over 20 intelligence agencies, and so look to maybe even more. Look to some of these other agencies. So do the background research, do investigation. Look at other organizations that could be filing similar requests. That's where this kind of coalition work really becomes important, to understand what's out there, what's being requested. And of course, appeal the denials. One thing, if you know the specific records that you're able to identify, you can also do a mandatory declassification review request, which is something that isn't kind of highlighted as much when we're talking about FOIA work. That happens if it's a national security related document. If you can identify this specific document, again, be careful that you're able to source it to public sourcing, so you're not tipping off something that only a few people know about. But an MDR request, mandatory declassification review request, actually gives you an appeal process with the interagency appeal board that has a much higher rate of disclosing information than the FOIA appeal process. But with the MDR process, you can't litigate. So those are some things to consider, but it does have a higher success rate of actually getting information disclosed. So FOIA collaboration, so there's a guide, we'll pass out a few of them, that we published that gets into really the heart of collaborating when doing FOIA work. So a few of the kind of high-level tips there center around, approaching FOIA with a philosophy of openness. So there are groups that publish everything that they request. So they publish the request that can be used as a template. They publish the documents when they receive them. Obviously, there's some lag time if you're trying to work with a journalist. Take some time to analyze the documents they receive. But ultimately, when the information is out, it becomes powerful for other groups to be able to see what's out there, see what's been requested, reduce redundancies in requesting, reduce backlogs in agencies. It's a really important kind of core principle that we talk about. Similarly, learning the landscape about what other groups are doing, what other groups are filing requests and might be working on similar issues and have similar information or seeking similar information. Plan litigation strategies strategically, as Rick mentioned, plan litigation early on. If you are requesting records where you think you might go to litigation, talk to lawyers early on before you start to get into the appeal process, because any little thing could prevent a roadblock along the way. And so work with another organization that litigates, that has experience there. That's a really important kind of step. Coordinating with journalists, as some of the case studies exemplify. Journalists are at the front lines and have information from sources, so coordinating early with them and working with them to fuel your own advocacy campaigns. And so, encouraging journalists, pointing them in the right direction of what would be useful, what kind of information would be useful for them to obtain, that would help fuel your kind of overall strategy when it comes to public interest advocates. Promote reforms. Sometimes information is just completely blocked and you have to go to Congress to try to change the law, which can take a decade, but it's part of the long haul, as Rick goes a lot. And then, again, using state and local information laws. Just to kind of reiterate this piece, finding people in FOIA offices that you can work with in friendly ways at the federal level, at the state level, at the very local level, can sometimes lead you to the right information that you need. There's sometimes people within these information offices that want the information to get out, and they're oftentimes willing to provide you information to help you even craft your requests to help the information go out. So they're almost kind of semi-whistleblowers in a way, because they know this information exists, but they have to get the right information request to process it, to get it out. We've had some of these cases recently. Archives overseas is actually a pretty interesting one. So there are some groups that do foreign policy, national security related issues that look to archives in other countries that actually have stronger information laws that you're able to obtain information about U.S. foreign policy. In other countries, we highlight some cases in the study about groups working with journalists and organizations in Mexico. They're able to get information about U.S. policy there, which is a really kind of creative way to get more information to understand foreign policy issues. A few FOIA resources. I have some handouts that we'll pass out, and we will, I guess, open up for questions now. Thanks, all.
Yeah, so let's take another pause for FOIA-specific questions. I just wanted to know a really interesting dovetail that I didn't mention in the beginning as I was giving examples of the kind of different issues that whistleblowers highlighted. I just want to highlight like a recent example. Richard actually just wrote a great blog post about this, about the dovetailing between the power of whistleblower information and FOIA in Scott Pruitt's resignation. We know that Kevin Chmielewski, the high-level, Scott Pruitt, and other EPA senior advisors too, not just Kevin, reported obviously lavish spending, conflicts of interest, et cetera. Sierra Club simultaneously had been doing FOIA litigation and requests and won disclosure and, by working with the press and dribbling out that information. I mean, it's really it was like a great two-pronged attack, I think, on the power of information and accountability using both with insider information amplified by and validated. Actually, a lot of, because some of Kevin's disclosures were challenged, and then when Sierra Club released their documents, they verified his disclosures and his assertions. So, and obviously it resulted in the resignation of a problematic administrator. So I think it's a great example of the kind of the two-pronged power of both vehicles for information to affect change. So do you, who has FOIA questions burning? Any burning FOIA questions?
Sure, I can pass you on more information. So Mexico's an interesting case because they passed their FOIA law in 2002 and worked with groups in the U.S. very closely to develop a really pretty strong information law. And this was after transition happened in Mexico, where the party that was ruling for 7 decades finally lost, and there was kind of this opening. They also have this oversight body that has an independent ability to overrule agency decisions. Which that doesn't happen here. The OGIS, the Office of Government Information Services, doesn't have that power. As Rick mentioned, they can issue advisory opinions, but they can't tell an agency, release that document. You're wrong. The requester is right. You have to disclose that. But in Mexico, they actually and so there are a lot of journalists working, using the information law. They've exposed some pretty high-level scandals of the current president, who has a mansion, a $10 million mansion that has connections to private contractors, led to a lot of exposure. So the National Security Archive is a group in our coalition. They work a lot with groups in Mexico and other countries to get information from both sides. So kind of do information requests in Mexico, especially around U.S. security systems there. And it's led to some pretty kind of big information disclosures there about U.S. security systems going towards security units responsible for human rights crimes there. So I can pass on.
And one other quick suggestion is, and this is going to sound strange, but as an offshoot of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, there's an environmental cooperation side agreement, and there's an entity called the Commission for Environmental Cooperation that implements that agreement. And so the 3 countries, U.S., Canada, and Mexico, have had regular meetings with non-governmental organizations, try to help create this. They do a lot of environmental database work, but also the open record law as well. You may get in touch with them, explain what you're doing, and they may be able to put you in touch with active groups.
Any other specific FOIA question? What I'd love to do is to break into 2 groups focused on, for those who want a deeper dive on FOIA, I think they wrongly conceived did how like that. Just 2 groups. I think we'll keep it the way it is. So if you're interested in doing kind of a deep dive discussion around FOIA stuff, if you guys could move to the back section over there, that back corner of the room, and you'll meet with Rick and Jesse. So we'll do that for about 20 minutes. And then if you're interested in more of the whistleblowing, source protection, talking to employees issues, because there might be friendly immigration officers who are completely conflicted about what's going on, who want to talk. Anyway, that's not totally selling my workshop. Anyway, if you want to talk about that, well, Jim and I will be up in this front corner. How's that? And we'll do that until 10 of, and we'll come back together and do a quick wrap up. Okay. All right. So break, and we'll just maximize our time and go there. We'll go here. Work yourself out.